I told you, Daniel. It's just paint. Those were the last words Emily ever said to me. We were standing in the guest room, arguing about two shades of blue no one but her would ever care about. Ocean sky or misty harbor. She laughed when I rolled my eyes, kissed my cheek, and said softly, "Maybe someone will use it soon." Then she grabbed her keys, said she had a showing across town, and walked out the door. That was 21 days ago. 3 hours later, a police officer from Ann Arbor knocked on my door. Car crash on Briarwood Avenue. She'd swerved to miss a dog, hit a utility pole doing 50. The dog survived. Emily didn't. They said it was quick. I sold everything trying to give her a proper burial. Our house, my truck, even my grandfather's watch from his years at the GM plant. $43,000 to say goodbye. The funeral director, Mr. Hatcher, talked gently about payment plans, like grief could be financed. But I couldn't let her be buried on credit. The day we lowered her into the ground, the air felt wrong. Too cold for October, like the season itself refused to move on. Emily's sister, Claire, stood apart from the rest, her sunglasses hiding eyes I already knew would be dry. She'd never liked me. Too ordinary, she once said, for a woman like Emily. When the final prayer ended, and the coffin disappeared into the earth, Claire stepped forward. Her hand landed on my arm, fingers cold as marble. The scent of smoke clung to her dress. She leaned in, close enough that only I could hear. "She was leaving you, Daniel," she whispered. "For her yoga instructor." 8 words. That's all it took to detonate whatever pieces of me were left. I remember my brother Ben asking what she said, but my tongue wouldn't move. The world went muffled. I stood there until everyone else had gone, staring at the grave like it owed me answers. That night, in the house that was no longer mine, I opened every drawer, every closet, desperate to prove Claire wrong. I went through Emily's emails, her texts, her receipts. No sign of anyone named Ryan, the yoga instructor. Just her normal life, grocery orders, appointment reminders, a few selfies. Then I found it. In her jewelry box, beneath the silver necklace I'd given her on our 10th anniversary, there was a small black USB drive. A strip of masking tape across it, labeled in her handwriting, "If I die before 40." My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I plugged it into my laptop. Only one file appeared, a video dated 3 weeks before the crash. The same night, she'd come home late, saying the closing ran long. I clicked play. Emily's face filled the screen. Her eyes were red, her breathing shallow. She kept glancing toward the door like someone might walk in at any second. "Daniel," she whispered, "if you're watching this, they killed me." The room tilted. "I found out something about your family, something your father's been hiding for 30 years. The proof is in his workshop." She hesitated, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood. "Don't trust anyone, not even Ben." The video cut out. I stared at the frozen frame of her face until the laptop battery died, the darkness swallowing her image. That night, I didn't sleep. I drove to my father's house just before dawn, headlights carving through the fog that rolled over the fields like smoke. His workshop light was on. It always was. If Emily was right, then her death wasn't an accident. And whatever she found in there, whatever secret my family buried, it was still waiting for me to open the door. We knew each other's coffee orders by heart. She liked hers with oat milk and a hint of cinnamon. Mine was black with 1 sugar, always in the chipped blue mug she hated. We could finish each other's sentences during movies and could both predict the exact moment the hero would do something stupid. The little arguments about trash duty had long faded into rhythm, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday were mine. She handled recycling on Wednesdays. We'd become efficient, practiced, predictable. A marriage that ran smoothly enough to forget it once had passion. We met in 2009 at my cousin Mason's wedding. She was the maid of honor in a soft lilac dress, laughing with a glass of champagne in her hand. I was the awkward groomsman who managed to spill an entire glass down her front. I expected anger, maybe even a slap. Instead, she threw her head back and laughed, a bright, easy sound that filled the hall. "Well," she said, dabbing her dress with a napkin, "now I don't have to worry about looking too perfect." That was Emily. She found the light in every disaster. Our house sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees, the kind that turned gold in autumn and buried your car in leaves by November. It was a 3-bedroom colonial with leaky pipes, a creaky back door, and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of vanilla. I kept promising to fix the plumbing. I never did. The neighborhood was full of kids, sidewalk chalk, bikes left in driveways, laughter drifting through open windows. For years, we tried to add our own laughter to the mix. 2 miscarriages, 3 rounds of IVF, and finally, a doctor who said gently that sometimes, no matter how much love you have to give, the body doesn't cooperate. Emily cried for days. Then one morning, with her hair still tangled from sleep, she said, "We're getting a dog instead." We never did get that dog. Sundays were for my mother, Margaret. She lived 20 minutes away in the same ranch house where I'd grown up. She adored Emily, treated her like the daughter she never had. They'd spend entire afternoons in the kitchen together, my mom teaching her how to make pot roast so tender it fell apart with a fork. Meanwhile, I'd sit in the living room with my dad, Frank, watching the Lions lose again. He wasn't much of a talker. A retired electrician who could fix anything with his hands, but never figured out how to fix the distance between his words and his heart. The closest he came was at my wedding, when he pulled me aside and said, "You got a good one, son. Don't screw it up." My brother Ben lived 2 streets over with his wife, Lauren, and their twin boys. We had game nights once a month. Emily would wipe the floor with everyone at Scrabble, accusing the rest of us of cheating while somehow managing to use all 7 letters in one go. Lauren brought her spinach dip. Ben drank 3 beers, never 4. We'd laugh, pretending life wasn't slowly turning into repetition. Same jobs, same routines, same jokes that weren't quite as funny anymore. Emily worked as a real estate agent for Merrick Realty downtown. She was good at it, had a gift for reading people, for finding the exact house that fit them. She came home glowing after closings, telling stories about young couples crying over new keys or families hugging on their front lawns. Her commissions paid for the things my teaching salary couldn't. New appliances, vacations, the dream of maybe buying a cabin someday up north near Traverse City. I taught chemistry at Franklin High, the same school I'd graduated from 20 years earlier. My students called me Mr. C, not because it was cool, but because Cooper was apparently too boring. I loved it, the sound of burners clicking on, the smell of chalk, the moment when a kid's eyes lit up because something finally made sense. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. We'd started planning a trip to Italy for our 20th anniversary, 5 years away, but we already had a list of places we wanted to see. Florence, Rome, Venice. I promised her we'd stand on a balcony somewhere and toast with cheap wine. The morning she died started just like that life we'd built. Quiet, ordinary, steady. I was grading lab reports at the kitchen table while she stood by the window, holding up paint swatches against the light. The guest room again. She'd been obsessing over it for weeks. Misty sky or harbor gray? She asked, her brow furrowed. They're the same color, Em. They're completely different, she said, turning one slightly. Look at the undertones. I sighed, too tired from a night of lesson prep to argue. Nobody even uses that room anyway. She smiled at me then, one of those soft, amused smiles that meant she wasn't really mad. Maybe someone will soon. Those were the last words she said before she left. She walked over, kissed my cheek despite my irritation, and said the words that would replay in my mind for the rest of my life. Maybe someone will soon. Then she grabbed her purse and keys, mentioned she had an early showing on the east side, a young couple looking for their first home, and left. The door closed behind her at 8:17 a.m. The police knocked at 11:43. The funeral nearly broke me, financially, emotionally, in every sense a person can break. What they don't tell you about death is how much it costs to do it right, how grief comes with an invoice. Mr. Hatcher, the funeral director, sat across from me in his office that smelled faintly of wax and lilies. His voice was smooth, too gentle, practiced from years of selling comfort. We have several packages, he said, sliding glossy brochures across his mahogany desk like he was booking me a vacation, not a burial. The basic plan was $28,000. That didn't include the burial plot, the headstone, or what he called optional memorial services. By the time he was done, the total was $43,000. We offer payment plans, he added, like he was doing me a kindness. But I couldn't stand the thought of burying Emily on credit. She deserved better than monthly reminders of her absence arriving in the mail. That's when I found out she'd let our life insurance lapse 6 months earlier. The notice was buried in her desk drawer, the words policy terminated stamped in red. When I called the company, choking on desperation, they told me the payments had stopped. Something about restructuring finances. She hadn't said a word. The first thing I did was drain our savings, the $12,000 we'd been setting aside for Italy. Then I sold the house. A guy named Carl showed up, chewing gum and carrying a clipboard, offering cash and a 7-day closing. $60,000 below market. I took it. My truck went next. A 5-year-old Ford F-150 I'd kept spotless until that week. My Uncle Roy handed me $8,000 for it, less than half its value. I'm doing you a favor, he said. Maybe he believed it. But the hardest thing to sell was the watch. My grandfather's old Rolex Submariner. He'd worn it every day at the GM plant from 1958 until the day he retired. It still ticked perfectly, the glass scratched and the band worn smooth from decades of honest work. The pawn shop owner, a Vietnamese man named Min, studied it under the light before nodding. For 1,000, he said, I'll hold it 6 months. You come back, I'll sell it back for the same. We both knew I wouldn't. The funeral blurred by in slow motion. A sea of black clothes, murmured condolences, the smell of roses and rain. My Aunt Denise kept touching my arm, saying Emily was in a better place, as if dying at 38 could ever qualify as that. My colleague from the science department, Harold, gripped my hand too tight and muttered something about time healing all wounds. My mother, Margaret, stood beside me like a fortress, intercepting people when their sympathy turned into interrogation. My father, Frank, just stared at the casket with the kind of silence that comes from understanding how fragile everything really is. And then there was Claire. She stood in the back, apart from everyone else, her arms folded, sunglasses hiding eyes that never once looked my way. Even during the viewing, while others leaned in to whisper their goodbyes, She stayed frozen, a statue made of disdain. When the service ended and people filed outside for the procession, she was already in her car, window cracked just enough for cigarette smoke to curl into the cold October air. At the cemetery, the wind cut through my suit like glass. The priest read from Ecclesiastes, something about there being a season for every purpose, but all I could think about was how Emily's season had ended too soon. The hydraulic hum of the lowering machine filled the air, mechanical and cold, drowning out the prayer. Everyone tossed their roses onto the casket, one by one. Claire still held hers, a single white rose that looked stark against her black dress. When she finally moved, she came to stand beside me. Her perfume mixed with the smoke on her breath. Her gloved hand brushed my sleeve, and her voice came out low and steady. "She was leaving you anyway," she whispered. My mind went blank. The priest said something about eternal rest, but all I could hear was Claire's voice, flat, certain, cruel, echoing in the hollow place where everything I'd known about my wife used to be. For her yoga instructor, Ryan thought you should know. Those 8 words hit me harder than any punch could. I stood there, frozen beside the open grave, watching Claire drop her white rose onto the casket before walking away, heels tapping sharp against the path like gunshots. My brother Ben called after me, asking what she'd said. His wife Lauren gave me that worried look people reserve for the freshly widowed. Even my father, who rarely noticed anything emotional, frowned. "Nothing," I managed. She said nothing. But that night, alone in a house that already belonged to someone else, Claire's words burned through my skull. "She was leaving you anyway." I tore through every room like a madman. The first thing to go was the wedding album, torn from the shelf and hurled against the wall. The spine cracked, pages fanned out, photos scattering across the floor. I dropped to my knees, clutching snapshots of our lives, our smiles, our vacations, our anniversaries, while sobbing until my chest ached. Then the grief hardened into something darker. Rage. I needed the truth. I needed proof that Claire was lying, that Emily hadn't spent the last months of her life loving someone else. I started with her email. Nothing but work correspondence and Target receipts. I combed through her credit card statements next. No strange hotels, no expensive dinners, no new lingerie or last-minute getaways. Her phone was next. I'd picked it up from the police station earlier that day, sealed in a plastic bag with her wedding ring and keys. Hundreds of messages between us, mundane, familiar, heartbreakingly normal. Her last text, a single red heart after I'd told her I'd grab milk on my way home. Then I checked her jewelry box. Buried beneath tangled necklaces and old bracelets, my fingers brushed something smooth and hard. A small black USB drive, wrapped in masking tape. Emily's handwriting curved across the label in neat blue ink. "If I die before 40. The words made my blood turn to ice. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd been grading lab reports that morning, back when life had still made sense. The refrigerator hummed. The house groaned in the wind. My hands shook as I slid the USB into my laptop. One file appeared. A video. The timestamp read October 2nd, 3 weeks before the crash. The same night, she'd come home late, saying her showing had run long. I clicked play. Emily's face filled the screen. But this wasn't my wife. The one who teased me about my coffee habits or stole my hoodies when she was cold. This version looked terrified. Her eyes darted off camera every few seconds, her breathing uneven. She was sitting on the guest room bed, the one she'd wanted to repaint. The walls behind her were still that bland beige she hated. Daniel, she began, voice trembling. If you're watching this, it means they killed me. And before you think I'm being paranoid, please, just listen. She lifted a manila folder into view, stuffed full of papers. 3 weeks ago, I was showing a house on Crestwood Drive. The buyer never showed. But in the basement, I found a box the previous owner must have left behind. It was filled with old federal documents, FBI files, surveillance photos, transcripts. She paused, swallowing hard. Your father's name was on nearly every page. My breath caught. Frank Cooper isn't who you think he is, she continued. None of them are. I read enough to know this isn't just about the past. It's about all of you. About us. She held up one of the documents, a yellowed sheet stamped with the seal of the U.S. Marshal Service. Your Uncle Roy isn't Frank's brother. His real name is Joseph Carter. He testified against the Carter crime family in 1994. Your father wasn't an electrician. He was a U.S. Marshal assigned to protect him as part of witness security. They changed their names. They moved here. And when you were born, they made you part of it. She wiped her eyes, the camera shaking in her hands. Daniel, your entire life has been built on a lie. You, Ben, your mother, none of you are who you think you are. I could barely breathe. The room tilted, the walls closing in as she spoke. There's more, she whispered. The reason we couldn't have children, it wasn't me. And it wasn't bad luck. When you were 3, your father authorized something. Experimental. A medical procedure. They said it was for safety, that it would protect you if anyone ever tried to track the family. But Daniel, she hesitated, biting her lip until it bled. You were sterilized. You'll never be able to have children. And your father knew. The screen froze on her tear-streaked face before cutting to black. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark laptop screen, unable to move. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left in the world. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like something trying to get in. There's a sealed court document, Emily said through tears on the video, explaining that the Cooper bloodline was deemed too dangerous to continue. The federal prosecutor demanded it as part of the immunity deal. Her voice cracked. Your birth name was Daniel Carter Jr. Your biological father led one of the most violent organized crime families in the country. He ordered the murders of 3 federal judges before they finally caught him. Your mother, your real mother, made a deal with the feds to save you and Ben. But the price was ensuring that the Carter bloodline ended with the 2 of you. She wiped her eyes, taking a shaky breath. I confronted Frank about it last month. I thought he'd deny it. But he didn't. He told me I was putting everyone in danger just by knowing the truth. He said the Carters never forget, never forgive, and if they ever found out where you all were, they'd wipe out the entire family. He told me to burn the documents, to forget I ever saw them. Emily looked straight into the camera now, her expression hardening with resolve. But you deserve to know who you are, Daniel. You deserve to know why we couldn't have children. Why your father has enough unmarked bills hidden in his workshop to disappear overnight. Why there are no family photos from before 1996. She paused, glancing off-screen. The proof is in his workshop, in a metal box labeled circuit breakers. He doesn't know I found it. Her face softened suddenly. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd loved my entire adult life. And Daniel, she whispered, her voice breaking. I wasn't having an affair with Ryan. I met with him because his brother works for the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was trying to find a safe way to tell you all this, to get us out before something happened. But I think Frank suspects me. I think he's already told someone. So if anything happens to me, If they make it look like an accident, please believe me. It wasn't. The screen went black. I sat there, staring into the void where her face had been. The kitchen was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Every word echoed in my skull. Then I grabbed my phone. "Ben," I said, my voice shaking. "Meet me at Dad's workshop. Now, don't tell anyone where you're going." The workshop sat behind my parents' house, just like it always had, a converted garage that smelled of sawdust and machine oil. For 40 years, Frank Cooper had called it his sanctuary, the place where he fixed radios and televisions for half the neighborhood. I flipped the light switch, and the fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, bathing the room in harsh white. Every pegboard was neatly lined with tools, every shelf perfectly labeled in his square handwriting. Ben showed up 5 minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What the hell is this about, Dan? It's nearly midnight. Help me find a box marked circuit breakers," I said, already pulling containers off the shelves. He frowned. "You're scaring me. Is this about Emily? You need to. Just help me," I snapped, shoving the USB drive into his hand. "Watch this while I search." He hesitated, then pressed play on his phone. I tore through the place. Boxes marked fuses, wire nuts, voltage testers, but no circuit breakers. By the time I turned back, Ben was standing in the corner, face drained of all color. His eyes met mine, wide with disbelief. This can't be real," he whispered. "Keep looking," I said. Something in the corner caught my eye. Dad's old red Craftsman tool chest. It had been there my whole life, bottom drawer sealed with a rusty lock. He'd always said it was just old manuals and spare parts. I didn't think twice. I grabbed a crowbar from the bench and jammed it into the latch. The lock gave way with a loud metallic snap. Inside was a layer of faded repair manuals. Beneath them, a gray metal box with masking tape across the top. On it, written in my father's unmistakable block letters, "Circuit breakers." My pulse roared in my ears. I lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of photographs, yellow documents, and government seals. The first picture showed my father, not as a small-town handyman, but in a U.S. Marshal's uniform, standing outside a federal courthouse. Another photo showed a younger version of me and Ben, different names printed on old-school ID cards. Beneath that were court transcripts, affidavits, and witness protection forms stamped confidential. United States Marshals Service. Ben let out a strangled sound. "Oh my God!" And I realized, with a sick twist in my stomach, that Emily had been right. Our entire lives, our names, our memories, our family, had been one long, careful lie. Inside the box were photographs that shattered the last illusions I had about my life. One showed 2 little boys, me and Ben, but the names scrawled on the back weren't ours. Daniel Carter Jr. and Vincent Carter. A woman I didn't recognize held us close, her eyes full of pride and sadness. The back read in faded ink, "Maria Carter, 1993. Under the photographs lay the documents, official seals, stamped signatures, legal jargon that made my hands tremble. A witness protection agreement dated November 15, 1994. Joseph Carter, a.k.a. Roy Cooper, agreeing to testify against the Carter crime family in exchange for new identities for his entire extended family. Then came the medical records. One from Cincinnati Children's Hospital made my knees give out. Bilateral vasectomy performed on Daniel Carter Jr., age 3. Procedure authorized by U.S. Marshal Frank Cooper, as per federal prosecutor's directive. Another record, nearly identical, or Ben's name. Both of us sterilized before we could even form words, before we had the chance to choose who we would become. Ben's voice trembled behind me. We need to confront him. Frank was in his recliner when we burst into my parents' house, the TV flashing the 11 o'clock news like it was any other night. Margaret sat beside him, knitting calmly. When they looked up, I saw the truth in their eyes before a single word was spoken. "You found the box," Frank said quietly. It wasn't a question. "You let them kill her," I shouted, throwing the photographs onto the floor. "Emily figured out your lies, and you let her die for it." Margaret gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. But Frank, he didn't flinch. His calm was the kind you only earn from decades of living on the edge. Not the calm of a retired electrician, but that of a man who had stared down death and negotiated with it. "Sit down, Daniel," he said. "Don't call me that," I snapped. "My name is Daniel Carter Jr." "No," he said firmly. "Daniel Carter Jr. died in 1994. You are Daniel Cooper, my son, in every way that matters. Except biologically." Ben cut in, shaking with fury. "Except you stole our future. You made sure we'd never have kids." Frank's expression cracked, age and guilt collapsing into one. "Your biological father ordered the murders of 3 federal judges. He had an entire rival family burned alive, including 2 children younger than you were. The prosecutor decided that line of blood had to end. It was that, or risk you being found, groomed, and used by the Carters later. I didn't choose this. I carried it out because it was the only way to save you. So, you played God," I said bitterly. "I played father," he said, his voice breaking. "I raised you. I loved you. I protected you. For 30 years I kept you alive. And Emily?" I shouted. "Did you protect her too?" His composure finally faltered. His eyes glistened. She wouldn't stop digging. I begged her to stop. When she started meeting with that federal attorney, it drew attention. The Carters still have people in the system, Daniel. People who watch for names, for questions. They found out. I got a call, anonymous number, telling me they knew our location. That if I didn't handle the problem quietly, they'd take all of us. "You chose them over her," I said, voice shaking. He shook his head slowly. "I chose you and Ben. If she'd exposed us, none of you would have survived the week. The car crash was fast. She didn't suffer. You knew," I said, barely able to speak. "I knew someone was going to die," he said softly. "I couldn't save everyone. I've spent 30 years wondering when this day would come. Every knock at the door, every stranger in the street. I've lived in fear they'd find you. Everything I did, everything I sacrificed, was to keep you breathing." Ben's voice cracked. "You built our lives on lies." Frank nodded, tears running down his face. "Lies built on love. You both had lives, careers, families, dreams. You had normal childhoods, not targets on your backs. Love built on lies isn't love," I said. Margaret's voice, soft and trembling, cut through the silence. "We weren't your biological parents, Daniel, but we loved you like our own. That was never a lie." I stared at Frank, this man who'd taught me how to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle, who'd saved me and destroyed me in the same lifetime. A man who'd let my wife die to keep a secret buried beneath 30 years of fear. "I'm going to the FBI," I said finally. "Tonight." Frank nodded slowly, like he'd known this was coming all along. "There's a bag in the workshop. Cash. Clean IDs. You'll need them once you talk to the feds. The Carters will come for you when this gets out." "I don't care," I said. He looked at me, his voice low and filled with sorrow. "Yes, you do. Because no matter what name they gave you, you're still my son. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know whether that was a promise or a curse. Inside the box were photographs that shattered the last illusions I had about my life. One showed two little boys, me and Ben, but the names scrawled on the back weren't ours. Daniel Carter Jr. and Vincent Carter. A woman I didn't recognize held us close, her eyes full of pride and sadness. The back read in faded ink, Maria Carter, 1993. Under the photographs lay the documents, official seals, stamped signatures, legal jargon that made my hands tremble. A witness protection agreement dated November 15, 1994. Joseph Carter, a.k.a. Roy Cooper, agreeing to testify against the Carter crime family in exchange for new identities for his entire extended family. Then came the medical records. One from Cincinnati Children's Hospital made my knees give out. Bilateral vasectomy performed on Daniel Carter Jr., age 3. Procedure authorized by U.S. Marshal Frank Cooper, as per federal prosecutor's directive. Another record, nearly identical, bore Ben's name. Both of us sterilized before we could even form words. Before we had the chance to choose who we would become. Ben's voice trembled behind me. We need to confront him. Frank was in his recliner when we burst into my parents' house, the TV flashing the 11 o'clock news like it was any other night. Margaret sat beside him, knitting calmly. When they looked up, I saw the truth in their eyes before a single word was spoken. You found the box, Frank said quietly. It wasn't a question. You let them kill her, I shouted, throwing the photographs onto the floor. Emily figured out your lies, and you let her die for it. Margaret gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks. But Frank, he didn't flinch. His calm was the kind you only earn from decades of living on the edge. Not the calm of a retired electrician, but that of a man who had stared down death and negotiated with it. Sit down, Daniel, he said. Don't call me that. I snapped. My name is Daniel Carter Jr. No, he said firmly. Daniel Carter Jr. died in 1994. You are Daniel Cooper, my son, in every way that matters. Except biologically. Ben cut in, shaking with fury. Except you stole our future. You made sure we'd never have kids. Frank's expression cracked, age and guilt collapsing into one. Your biological father ordered the murders of 3 federal judges. He had an entire rival family burned alive, including 2 children younger than you were. The prosecutor decided that line of blood had to end. It was that, or risk you being found, groomed, and used by the Carters later. I didn't choose this. I carried it out because it was the only way to save you. So, you played God, I said bitterly. I played Father, he said, his voice breaking. I raised you. I loved you. I protected you. For 30 years I kept you alive. And Emily? I shouted. Did you protect her too? His composure finally faltered. His eyes glistened. She wouldn't stop digging. I begged her to stop. When she started meeting with that federal attorney, it drew attention. The Carters still have people in the system, Daniel. People who watch for names, for questions. They found out. I got a call, anonymous number, telling me they knew our location. That if I didn't handle the problem quietly, they'd take all of us. You chose them over her, I said, voice shaking. He shook his head slowly. I chose you and Ben. If she'd exposed us, none of you would have survived the week. The car crash was fast. She didn't suffer. You knew, I said, barely able to speak. I knew someone was going to die, he said softly. I couldn't save everyone. I've spent 30 years wondering when this day would come. Every knock at the door, every stranger in the street. I've lived in fear they'd find you. Everything I did, Everything I sacrificed was to keep you breathing. Ben's voice cracked. You built our lives on lies. Frank nodded, tears running down his face. Lies built on love. You both had lives, careers, families, dreams. You had normal childhoods, not targets on your backs. Love built on lies isn't love, I said. Margaret's voice, soft and trembling, cut through the silence. We weren't your biological parents, Daniel, but we loved you like our own. That was never a lie. I stared at Frank, this man who'd taught me how to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle, who'd saved me and destroyed me in the same lifetime. A man who'd let my wife die to keep a secret buried beneath 30 years of fear. I'm going to the FBI, I said finally. Tonight. Frank nodded slowly, like he'd known this was coming all along. There's a bag in the workshop. Cash. Clean IDs. You'll need them once you talk to the feds. The Carters will come for you when this gets out. I don't care, I said. He looked at me, his voice low and filled with sorrow. Yes, you do. Because no matter what name they gave you, you're still my son. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know whether that was a promise or a curse. The walls in my apartment are painted sea mist blue, the color Emily once said would make any room feel like hope. Sometimes I wake up at 3 in the morning, heart pounding, convinced I hear footsteps outside my door. For a moment, I'm certain Frank's enemies have finally tracked me down. But then the silence settles, and the city hums softly below my window. By sunrise, I'm just Daniel Cooper again, a teacher making coffee, grading papers, and heading to class to talk about chemical bonds and transformations, about how pressure and time can change one element into something entirely new. The truth about my past burned through everything I thought I understood about my life. But as much as it wrecked me, it also gave me something priceless, freedom. Emily gave her life for that truth. I'd give anything to have her back, but I've come to realize that living with honesty, even when it's dangerous, is still better than living safely behind someone else's lie. Some nights I still play the old video she recorded, the one the FBI found in her office. Her voice fills the quiet room, steady and warm, like she's still here. She talks about truth and love and how both can cost everything but are always worth it. Watching her reminds me that what she did wasn't just bravery, it was love in its purest form. The kind that refuses to let you live in the dark, no matter the price. That's my story. If it reached you in some way, hit like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Tell me in the comments if you've ever faced a moment where you had to choose between the easy lie and the hard truth. Because sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones that make us free. And remember, love may not always save a life, but truth, even when it shatters everything you know, can save your soul.